So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. We're talking about onboarding new players. This is a deep dive. What is the thing you wanted to say in the last video that you had to bite your knuckle because you just wanted to go off and say, and give me 5 minutes because I have to say these things? What are those things?
So for me, I think the biggest thing is it's kind of just furthering something that I think both of you talked about a little bit, especially Tim. I was just like, it's okay, and I think helpful for new players to be extremely clear on a point past in character gameplay of like what's happening and why, and kind of making sure that people kind of get a sense for the direction of the game. It's very easy. So I think one of the best things about RPGs is how much freedom that they have. But one of the most difficult things about RPGs is how much freedom they have. And it can be incredibly overwhelming as a new player to just be like, do whatever. It's just like, okay, but what do I do though? Like, that like doing whatever only helps if you have some sense of foundation for what is even, an option. And I know in a perfect world, anything's an option and you can do whatever you want, but like that's not helpful if you have nothing to work with at all. So I think when you're very much at the extreme beginner stages of the process, being extremely specific about like, this is just kind of going to be a sample platter of the experience. So I'm going to kind of guide you through some of the things that could happen. We're going to have a conversation with the person. We're going to have a travel. We're going to have a combat, and we're going to be extremely clear about point A to point B to point C and how that goes. And normally you'd have freedom to kind of do whatever, but like having some sense of direction that you can give them to latch onto at first, I think is just so important in the process of just like, because it gives them something to orient their freedom around, and it gives them kind of a thing to make decisions about rather than just deciding whatever about anything. It's kind of like, okay, so this is the situation that you're in right now. You can do whatever to solve it, but you're here, and we're not going to bother about how you got here or where you're going to go after, but like, this is where we're starting. This is what you can do, and just kind of let them figure out in a very focused situation first. And then as they ease in, halfway through session one, you can kind of expand the circle out a little bit of their decision-making range, and you can kind of begin to zoom out more and more until eventually they can, play a full sandbox game and make their own motivations and stories and things like that. But I think too much freedom and not enough focus at the beginner level can be a huge danger.
I think that something that's important to be said is that a lot of the things you said apply to any role-playing game, in my opinion. Not that they all have to be that, but that there is a ground between brand new players and absolute expert players where I'm like, some games I've played in, some games I've ran, I'd say more likely, I probably should have made certain things more clear. Like you said, kind of, hey, you can play however much you want in this area, or you can do whatever you want, anything goes. But also remember that if you want anything to happen, you have to do the next part of the story. Not necessarily that explicit, but that idea where it's not in the books, and I don't really hear people talk about it, and often bringing it up gets into the sort of philosophical idea of railroading. But to some degree, if you sit around the table, you're agreeing to do what I've planned. And obviously that bears this whole other conversation, but it's very important that new players understand that you can do anything, but I haven't prepared a literal entire world, so you can't literally do anything, And I think that idea should be taught in general to more people, whether they're experts or, absolutely brand new to the game.
Yeah, and I think it cannot be overstated that the simplicity of what you do should be so bare bones basic that it seems almost wrong. I cannot stress that enough. In my opinion, the simplicity is so key. Of what do I mean? I mean, like, of the challenge you have prepared, of the story. It should be what you would consider a trope, is brand new to most of these people. And even if they recognize it, they'll find, I think, peace in the recognition. I don't think that they'll be like, oh, I've heard this story 100 times. I think they'll say, oh, I've heard this story. I kind of know what's supposed to happen. There is, like, if James was going to walk me step by step through a recipe, I would want him to choose something that was very simple, because I'm not used to standing in the kitchen, standing at the stove. Okay, I don't know the basic functions that a normal cook would have as rote memory of, like, no, well, you have to do this and never put your burner like this. So as you're learning the game and the rules, there's also this sort of unspoken language that happens in an RPG that is, it's very difficult to teach, and the only way to teach it is experientially. So there is a town. The town is being attacked by goblins. Their chieftain is in the forest north. The end. Like, that's it. Then let them kind of explore, but that's the end. Not like, well, we're gonna do beef Wellington, and it's like, I don't. So that would be it. I cannot overstate. Simple, 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 simple.
Yeah, it's easy to lose, especially with how much a lot of us play very regularly, and for years and years now. Of like, for us, the burden of the mechanic almost none. Like, it's just like, oh, I need to do what check? Okay, yeah, I'll do that. And it's easy to forget sometimes how much of a burden those rules have on a person who's brand new to the game. Of just like, okay, so I have to make a what kind of check that's using this, which attribute is that? And then a skill, so I add my proficiency bonus, like things that for experienced players will take a quarter of a second to parse out. For someone who's brand new, could take a minute, to sort of, work through, and okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to add. I need to roll. Okay, which dice is the D20? Like, things that are so obvious to people who do this a lot that aren't obvious at all to new players. So I think you make a fantastic point about the simplicity of the game experience, because so much of their mental workload is going to be put into just figuring out what anything even is about the game. So if they also then, I love me a good, complicated combat encounter with a deep moral quandary, like, but I'm totally with you. This is not the time to pull that out. Even if, it's an important part of the experience that you can show them. Like, I would break those things down into their base elements of like, okay, we're going to do a very simple combat encounter. And at the very end of the combat, once the combat's done, there might be a small, binary moral quandary that they have to decide. That's okay. But like, the moment they just start mixing everything together, like you say, the complex recipes, it just becomes so overwhelming so quickly. And it's easy to sort of get a point where your mind just gets gridlocked by all these different things. You're trying to like consider morality, and also like all these rules that you've never even used before. And just to honestly, like, something that's difficult, it's just like doing dialogue. If you're not stage trained, or you don't play a lot of RPGs, like, talking in character is hard, and like, it can be easy to like start muffling your words and not know what to say. So if you give somebody like a super hard hitting dialogue with a complex mechanical exchange in the middle of it, like, that's going to just destroy somebody's brain, like, to try to even figure out, like, what are you going to say to him? It's just like, I don't know. Like, it's easy to overestimate how much these things come naturally. They don't. They don't come naturally. They take practice. And just like you can't practice a complicated recipe or a crazy, guitar solo if you've never picked up an instrument before. You start with the basics and you build up.
I really like that Tim decided to go with a cooking analogy, and that you threw in at the end, Jeff, the music analogy, but specifically the idea that is what occurred to me was music, where somebody can get very overwhelmed and not understand, never get to the part that is enjoyable, right? So like you said, if you gave somebody a guitar and said, okay, play notes, just whatever, if you make sound, it's music, and they go, okay, well, yeah, but if it doesn't sound good to me, what's the point? But if you go, okay, learn these 3 chords, okay, if you strum this one, then this one, you have all these songs. You just got to get the pattern down. They get sort of an immediate hit of, oh my gosh, that is cool. I want to do that more. And I never really thought about that so much. Once you learn the game, you can get into those complicated things and do a lot, but that your sessions will take longer with newer players just to do normal stuff. When I say normal stuff, but like talking or combat or things that two other players come so easily. And it is important to realize that the mindset of that player playing is trying to think, oh, well, I don't know this rule, but I want to do this, but I don't want to disturb the person. But, oh, what are they saying now? Oh, okay, well, I have this potion. And like you said, their mind is reeling. And if you're not careful, they'll never get to the point where they go, oh, that was cool. My guy did this thing and he shot an arrow and it hit the goblin and then you cast a spell. And dumbing it down, but making it that simple. It's just important to remember that the players aren't going to have fun if it is too complicated, because if they mess up one little thing, like if I did give you a complicated recipe and you did it 80% well, I'm like, well, if there's that many elements, that other 20% is going to be like, oh, well, that's not good. But if you mess up a little bit of a mac and cheese stovetop recipe, I'm like, well, yeah, but it's still mac and cheese, stovetop mac and cheese. Like, you can't lose there.
I think many people make jokes to sort of mask insecurity or if they're feeling uncomfortable. So expect jokes. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not interested or that they don't want to do the things. It could be really awkward, hitting on what you said. If people, Jeff, if people aren't like stage trained, they can feel painfully awkward pretending to be someone else and their comfort level. So I think that you're going to have people who are going to make jokes and they're going to kind of do things that could seem like they're not interested, but my inclination is to say, look past that for a little while, because that is also their coping mechanism, because it's way easier to make a joke about the weirdness or, than it is to have this sort of personal epiphany and say, well, no, I will be the character. It's like one of the best ways to handle that, and I learned this from Chris Perkins. I'll mention this as often as I can because I was like, oh, he's brilliant. Chris Perkins is a very famous dungeon master for game mastering for people who make a living being funny. So especially I'm talking about like the penny arcade games. The people at the table weren't trying to waylay the game. That's just how they are. So as an example, one of them was like, they were on a wagon and Chris Perkins would take what they were saying in the joke and sort of massage it into the game actually progressing. So as an example, the characters were like, they're in a wagon now, like a horse-drawn carriage. And they were like, ooh, what does the kind of neighborhood look like? And he's like, it looks a little rough and tumble. And they were like, yeah, I roll up the windows and lock the doors. Obviously, you can't do that in a wagon. But the point is, their sentiment was, and he then extrapolated and said, okay, great. So you kind of watch the entrances to the carriage and make sure that, you sort of snap the shutters. He took what they meant, because their language is talking about a real world thing or making a joke or making something that is an anachronism, what their character's doing. So those would be my two thoughts. One, just let them joke and have fun and laugh with them. Because if I play with you for the first time and what I remember is that it wasn't fun, I probably won't do it again. And then, because we're not even touching session zeros and what's expected and play style, we don't care about that at this point. And then from there, if they do say something like, well, I'm gonna show this guy what's up. I'm gonna flex in the corner and I'm gonna take that and go, okay, cool. Roll me intimidation. What's that? Well, it's what you do when your character's trying to sort of do what you're doing. So yeah, you could be putting on a muscle show in the corner. Go ahead and roll me intimidation. All right, great, cool. So you're over there flexing, making it's awesome, and you're, and your pecs are bouncing up and down. And you know what? The guard notices that and actually takes a couple steps toward the door. Boom.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to, I think, lose sight of sometimes the things that new players will like sort of remember from the experience. And you make, I think, a really good point about like, if the thing that they remember is constantly being frustrated and overwhelmed, Like that's probably not gonna get them to come back. And especially with a system, a hobby as sort of deep and varied as RPGs are, it can be tempting sometimes to try to show them the things about it that you love from experience that take time to build up to. So things like having a really solid character motivation with like I know exactly how he's going to act and how that's different from me, and I can really separate their actions from my own, and I really like how that makes the game feel, and like that sort of thing. Like a brand new player is probably not going to be able to do that. Like they're probably just going to do whatever comes to mind, and like that's okay. And it's like worrying too much about like, oh, like, but that's if they want to have the most fun ever down the line, then I want to get them doing that right now. And it's like, in a sense, you can start to sort of poke and prod at those elements about like the richest possible experience. And by nature of that, do exactly what Tim is saying, advising against, which I agree with. It's like you don't want to, push them too hard to play a certain way or at a certain level that they might not be ready for. That might be the thing that you teach them in session 3 of like, actually, now that we've kind of got the basics under our belt, let's maybe start thinking about who your characters are and like what they want rather than just whatever you want to do. Is that something that would be interesting to you? If not, it's okay, but it'd be fun for me. That sort of thing. It's like you don't have to teach them everything in the very first session. It can be something that you sort of wean people onto over the course of, weeks and months, rather than like feeling like you need to show them the entire breadth of the RPG experience in that singular very first session, because that's, I think, going to overwhelm them, not endear them to the hobby. It's okay to take your time getting to all those deeper, more complicated parts.
Yeah, I remember actually running Mines of Phandelver, Lost Mines of Phandelver. And I did sort of what I said in the short form video, which was I took something that I was very familiar with and I was walking them through and mixing a lot of those things in as kind of telling them where to go, setting it up so they could use some of their abilities. But it is important. The other half of that, I think, is patience to some degree. And I bring that up because it's kind of exactly what you guys are saying, where you can't start too far ahead. I mean, it's that recipe analogy exactly, where they will get to that. And if you consider, most people may not remember, but if you consider where you learned or when you started worrying about your character's motivation, it's unlikely it was the first time you started playing. It's almost like you said, Jeff, kind of dropping that bait a little bit. And you can do that for different things, where it's like, hey, maybe this character really wants to work on their motivation, but this other character is only interested in kind of getting better. So he's looking for more things he can do in the game to progress. And it's almost like it's important to not impose what you want the players to learn, but rather to see what they want to learn and push them that way. I do want to sort of temper all of this with saying that you can pick and choose what you want to do. And this doesn't have to be for every game you GM. This is very specifically for brand new players. Usually when I run a game for people that have played the games or know the rules, I don't do this. But then in the same respect, I could use a little more of this at my table as well. So it's just important to remember that everybody's here to have fun. So try and find what everybody's fun is. Don't impose your own when you're teaching them, because that can leave a bad taste in people's mouths.
Yeah, and all right, I'm gonna throw a hand grenade into this whole thing and let's get very practical, because I love doing that. I love taking it into, all right, what do we actually do? So you have, 4 people. It's an in-person game, and you got a quiet player, not a problem. You have someone who's like pretty much, they're feeling it out, and you can tell in 3 years this person's going to be a great like GM maybe. And then you have that person who is just disruptive, and they're outside of the spirit of what I was suggesting. They're taking things like way too far. They're like, yeah, I want to steal the guard's money. The King's Royal Guard, I want to steal their money. And I don't know what I would do now. I know what I would do then, and I would punish them. And I'd be like, fine, roll for it. And guess what? It didn't matter what they rolled, they were going to get caught. And then I'd be like, yeah, okay, he arrests you because you're a bad player. The charge is high treason and being a bad player. No. So, what is the middle ground between not squashing that? How do you handle it? What do you do? And using my specific example, where they want to do something that is sort of undoable, that's really where I kind of think the line would be. It's not harmless. It's like, well, this is going to affect everybody. They're doing the big thing. I want to do this. I want to steal this. I want to break this. I want to kill this person. What do you do?
So I'm a big proponent of the idea that like out of character problems generally require out of character solutions. So I would just be extremely clear upfront to the player and to everybody about if they want to do that, the likelihood of success and what would happen, and the fact that it would destroy the game. To just be straight up and say, like, technically you can do whatever you want to. That is how this works. And if we want to explore this sort of disruptive, hooliganistic style of gameplay, if that sounds fun to everybody, no, and there are people who like to play that way, and that's fine.
The word hooliganistic is my new
So
favorite.
if that is how you want to play, we can. There you go, a gift from me to you. So yeah, just sorry. So yeah, just being extremely clear to them and to the other people of like, okay, so you can do this, but you probably won't succeed. And if you get caught, it's going to be bad. You might be executed. You might be jailed. Your character is probably just going to be out of the game. And it's going to be a big mess for everybody, not just you, not just your character. And if that's the way that we're going to play this, that's an option that we have on the table. But everybody needs to be okay with that. And we need to make sure that your fun is not destroying everybody else's fun to the point where you're ruining the game. Because I want you to be able to have fun. I want you to be able to do what you want. But if what you're doing and what you want is preventing everybody else from doing what they want, then that's not fun anymore. And just being that clear and that upfront about the impact that those sorts of decisions can have. And it very well could be the case of like, okay, yeah, I won't do that then. Yeah, because I don't want that to happen. Like that sounds like it would suck. Done, like problem solved. And if they say no, I'm gonna do it anyways, and it's like, okay, like that's a person-to-person conversation, not a learning a new game conversation. If you tell them that it's going to destroy the game to do that, and they do it anyways because they want to, then that's an entirely different conversation, separate from new players that you just have to deal with, friend to friend. Yeah, just be honest, and make sure that everybody gets a say, in that sort of thing. Like if he did that, if Tim stole money from the Royal Guard and got caught, and everybody got punished, would you be okay with that? Is that something that sounds fun to explore, or do you think that'd ruin it for you, James? Like, and you then have the option to say like, no, let's do it. Like, let's just go for it, and just whatever happens. Let's revel in the chaos. Cool, let's revel in the chaos. But if you say, actually, I was really kind of hoping to see the story through. I really kind of want to know what would happen here. And it's like, okay, well, let's find a way to direct that chaotic energy a different way then. It's like, okay, let's maybe not pickpocket the Royal Guard, but the king is going to give you this mission to disrupt the goblin chieftain who's going to attack. And maybe some of your crazy, hooliganistic, tendencies could be very good at causing disruption to those enemies, So it's just, I think finding a way to funnel that energy, if that energy is important to them to have, and it's valid if that is, finding like designated, smoking areas, basically, of like, okay, you can't steal from the Royal Guard. But if you want to steal from the Goblin supply line, then you can do that, and that'd be fun. and that would help the game. That would be the way that I approach it.
It's brilliant.
I really do like that idea specifically of reminding them that they're going to get a chance to do those things just later when it makes more sense. Because that is sort of the general thing that I will do, but more specifically, I will sort of quickly follow it through to, okay, well, why do you want to do that? So in the case of the guard, they're like, oh, I want to steal his money. And I go, okay, well, remember that the king is probably going to give you this quest. He's offering 200 gold bounty if you take care of this. The guards may be carrying 12 gold. You've probably got some on you. There's no benefit except potentially breaking the law. If you want to do that, maybe talk to your party, or I'd give the party a chance to respond to that. And like you said, Jeff, if at that point they go, well, I stabbed the guard, you're like, okay, you're playing a different game and we'll handle that later. But that idea specifically of kind of like, well, that's not really helping. You'll get a chance to use your pickpocket later. Right now, you're kind of on the way to talk to this guy. So, maybe let's try to do that. Almost not letting them, really, is especially for new players saying that option's off the table as nicely as you can. And usually they'll go, oh, okay, you know what? I do want to use that, but I'll get excited about it later when there's a goblin to pickpocket.
Yeah, like this room might not be full of hooks, but I know you want to use your used rope so bad. I promise you in the final encounter, it's going to be all hooks for your rope. Like, yeah, that's really smart. Anything else in particular that you really want to hit on for onboarding new players before we wrap up the deep dive? Is there anything you're like, hey, also this?
I don't think as much. I just think that the general idea.
It's really cool to bring people in and kind of show them.
So your internet paused, Jeff, and then
Sorry.
while James started talking at a normal started talking at a normal pace, it was like, it'd be really cool to show them. So I think you should both continue, and Jeff, you keep talking really fast. And no,
yeah, sorry, my internet cut at the perfect time where it like delayed my starting until after James waited for anybody to start talking, and then like just chose to just send it all as soon as he started talking.
Just push it right through.
You're not helping, Zoom.
All I was going to say super quick is just enjoy it. Like it's fun to bring people in and get to the point where you can have those experiences that you love so much about it. And while I cautioned before of being too enthusiastic about trying to do too much, be enthusiastic about the experience still. And even if they can't play the game exactly the way that you'll want them to down the line, you can still have a great time with it now. And that can be just as much fun as the experienced game that you'll get to have with them in a year when they're killing it.
Yeah, and the other important thing is, remember, if you're running the game, or I guess even if you're a player, that meta knowledge of certain things is not so bad. The idea that if you say, I'm going to steal the guard's money, the GM can tell you that's a bad idea because we're not progressing the story. That's meta knowledge. And it's good to be able to say that. Or if you go, oh, you know what? I want to intimidate this guard. Do you think that's something that's even possible? They could go, oh, no, this is kind of a big burly guy. It's not really going to work. You can give it a shot if you want, but you might make a fool of yourself. Where it's the kind of thing where it's okay to have those conversations. You don't have to let the players dig their own graves. And then at the end they go, well, I made a bunch of poor decisions because I didn't know the rules and it wasn't fun. So I think just stressing that idea that you can talk about the game outside of the game during the game, if that makes sense. And there's never anything wrong with that.
Yeah, and I was going to say, just remember that you only get one shot and you'll never be able to play again. So obviously the opposite. What was the last thing you tried for the first time and you're like, well, this is it, I've peaked. The idea is that if you can keep the vibe of what Jeff and James have mentioned of like, oh, that felt like fun. And we've hit on that a few times here on the channel where it's like how they feel and what actually happens are not necessarily the exact same thing. If the feel is fun, they will come back. And that's really what the main goal is, I think, because no matter how you feel it went, if they feel it was fun, they will like it and want to do it again. And just like anyone who's watching this video who has played for any measure of time, the player you are now, the game master you are now, is even going to be different than the one you are tomorrow. And so it's a path. It's a pathway. You're just trying to get them on the pathway. And that is I think easiest to do when everybody's having fun. So put in the comments below, what particular thing did we miss or not, dive deeply enough on? And then if there's anything in particular that you have, I rarely kind of dip into this kind of stuff, but I think it would be interesting. What's the worst experience you've had as a new player? Because maybe we could do a part 2 and kind of address specifics. Or what's the worst experience as a game master you've had with a new player trying to stab the city guard? But we're Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, and RPGs. If you like that kind of stuff, consider subscribing and be sure you hit the notification bell, because that way you'll know exactly when we post new videos, which is going to be every Sunday and Thursday. Guess let's wrap it up with a Tab-Tyrian toast.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
So in some of my first games of D&D, so Tim earlier in the video mentioned that he and his friends didn't know how to play, and I'm the one that Tim's the one that taught me how to play, and so you can see how that might have created problems. I remember in playing a game with Tim, I would always grab stuff that didn't matter. At one point, there was ashes from a ceremony, and I grabbed a handful because I thought they might be useful later. Or somebody dropped what I'm pretty sure was like a plot element, and I rolled really well to like sleight of hand and hide it, and then nobody knew where it was. And like I didn't tell my fellow players where it was, so it was just a mess, and I could have used a little more guidance as to, hey, maybe don't be a jerk.